Good morning and welcome to the Michigan Poverty Task Force webinar. We thank you so much for joining us this month. We are going to be talking today about children's savings accounts, which is something that we were really proud as we wrote our Poverty Task Force report for 2021. It was something that we prominently featured because there is, we believe, a lot of potential for us to help struggling families in Michigan if we were able to set up an infrastructure to facilitate and seed children's savings accounts. There are a lot of advantages that other states have seen by setting those accounts up. And so we are joined today by two leading experts in the field, people who have national reputations, people who have worked very closely with the children's savings account programs that we have here in the state of Michigan. And we are so really pleased to have them, and I'll introduce you to them later. In the meantime, we also want to talk about a very important deadline that's coming up for Michiganders who really need to have health insurance. And we know that's all Michiganders need and deserve to have health insurance. And there is a deadline that's going to be coming up next month for the insurance marketplace. And so I would like to introduce Laura Hall, who is the communications director for the Michigan Department of Insurance and Financial Services. And she's on and will talk to us a little bit about that important deadline. Laura?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for having me here today. And thanks for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the upcoming deadline, like you mentioned. Before I get into the deadline and our upcoming timing, just a couple quick comments. You know, health coverage is obviously very critical to the health and financial well-being of Michiganders, which is something Governor Whitmer obviously recognizes. And from the beginning of the pandemic, we had an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 Michiganders who lost coverage during the early months of the pandemic. And we recognized that problem and took action to try to help these folks get the coverage they need to protect their health. The governor called for a special enrollment period in the early months of the pandemic last year. And fortunately, this year with President Biden, a special enrollment has been opened from February 15th to August 15th. Now, this is usually the health insurance marketplace at healthcare.gov is open to folks to enroll in coverage in November and December. But this special enrollment period is allowing anyone who needs coverage for any reason to go online, check out their options. The American Rescue Plan actually increased subsidies to make cost savings or to increase cost savings for Michigan families so that a majority of Michiganders who sign up will actually qualify for low or no cost coverage through the marketplace. We know that people with health insurance have better health outcomes. So we are really pushing this final timeline to get people who need coverage for 2021 to get online and get signed up. We've got a lot of information on the website at Michigan.gov/health insurance. And I'm also going to plug in some links in the chat once I get done with my comments to some resources to help your folks push out the word. And our ask to you is to help us spread the word. We have social media graphics, flyers, newsletter articles, videos, a lot of content and resources available to help spread the message that there is still time to get coverage for 2021, but you have to sign up by August 15th. We are also hosting town halls, virtual town hall events to help consumers answer questions or ask questions and get answers to those questions and learn more about why it's so important to have health insurance and how they can go about getting covered. Our next event is August 12th at 7 p.m. That information is on that Michigan.gov/health insurance website, but we're also looking for partners to host other events. So if you have other events coming up where there might be an opportunity for someone to provide a few minutes of comments to consumers and Michiganders about health insurance and healthcare.gov, we would love the opportunity to be there. So I will drop my contact information in. And then finally, we're also putting together a coalition to work on health insurance enrollment for 2022, this upcoming enrollment period and beyond. So if any organizations are interested in joining us in that effort, again, please just contact me and we will get you connected with the right folks. But again, the important information, healthcare.gov, the deadline is August 15th. We want to get every Michigander who needs coverage signed up. So far as of June 1st, we've had 35,000 Michiganders take advantage of this. And we know that people tend to do, the biggest push ends up being in those last few weeks before the actual deadline. So anything that folks can do to help us get the word out and help us answer questions and help us educate consumers about this, the better. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and I'll plug in the links in just a moment.
Thank you so much, Laura. Are there questions in the chat? I should ask Stephanie Muirhead. Do you see any questions? Actually, I'm looking right now and I don't see any. I'm hoping that that means that everyone got all the information that they got from your presentation and that they're working hard with their constituents to ensure that we have the most robust participation in this important program. So, Laura, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. To talk about this important topic, and we will definitely stay in touch with you. Appreciate that. So for the majority of our time together today, we're going to have a conversation about children's savings accounts, which, you know, it's hard to kind of capture in a couple of sentences what that means because there are a lot of different kinds of children's savings account programs. However, what has been a constant is that people have found that having a savings mechanism where families, particularly low-income families, can have an opportunity to save, have incentives to save, have kind of a culture of savings, really has a lot of very important and positive effects for families. And we really want to expand those opportunities in Michigan. And right now we have 15 children's savings programs across the state. We're going to hear a little bit about how they operate. And we're going to talk a little bit about, as I mentioned at the beginning of our time together today, that the Michigan Poverty Task Force in our list of recommendations did request a $2 million appropriation to set up a statewide infrastructure. What we have found is those states that are having the most success with children's savings accounts are those who are offering technical support, are offering opportunities to assess the program, offering those kind of mentorship programs and mentorship opportunities so that people who stand up children's savings accounts have other professionals that they can link to easily, and just having the state acknowledge the importance of the program is a really important first step. And so we really want to do that here in Michigan. We had an appropriation that Governor Whitmer did put in her budget for 2022, the 2022 budget. Right now, as you know, the budget negotiations are ongoing. So we believe that that is a really good use of resources, particularly at a time where we really want to turn the corner on poverty. We want to be innovative. And this is, while there is a lot of opportunity for innovation with children's savings accounts, it's also a very proven strategy. And so we wanted to get the two best people in Michigan to talk about these issues. And I think that we really hit a home run with the people we were able to attract. One, Benita Melton has incredible experience on this front in her work with the Mott Foundation. She has worked with state officials in other states here in Michigan. She has helped to stand up CSAs here in our state and in other places. She's done tremendous research on the efficacy of children's savings accounts. And you know, I couldn't think of a better person to really give us kind of the broad view on why children's savings accounts are a really good way to go. And so she is the director of education of the education program at the Mott Foundation, where she has worked for more than 20 years. She joined the foundation in 1995 and was promoted to program officer in 2000 and program director in 2015. She has primarily worked on federal, state, and budget and tax policy issues, as well as strategies to help low and moderate income families save money and build assets, which is very much about what we're talking about today. She is a native of our state and a graduate of Michigan State University. She earned a bachelor's degree in finance and accounting, and she is a member of the Asset Funders Network Executive Committee. And active in a lot of different kinds of grant makers affinity groups. And before coming to Mott, she worked for the Pistons Palace Foundation, which is a philanthropic arm of the Detroit Pistons basketball franchise. So maybe she has an inside scoop on who they're going to choose with that first pick. And if she does, I'm sure she'll be happy to share that information with us today. Please welcome Benita. I also want to introduce Luke Forrest, who is the Executive Director of Community Economic Development Associates of Michigan. Luke also has a very long track record throughout his entire professional career, advocating on behalf of Michigan communities with his work with CEDAM, and then also with his previous work with the Michigan Municipal League. He has, has been tremendously important with CSAs here in the state of Michigan. CEDAM has been, really the leading group in making sure that those organizations that want to stand up CSAs really had the support and assistance that they needed. Before the work that he's doing now, he was a staffer and lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and the public policy director for Metro Matters, which is an organization focused on regional collaboration in Metro Detroit. And he holds degrees in urban planning and real estate development from the University of Michigan. And I don't know why this is, but almost every time we do one of these, we always have one person from Michigan State and one person from the University of Michigan. It just turns out that way. So we're glad that we're able to have representation from those two great institutions. And I'm going to start, if you don't mind, with a question for Benita. Benita, obviously you have been really immersed in kind of the CSA world for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about how they emerged? What was the impetus for CSA programs and why the Mott Foundation has invested in kind of incubating and supporting them?
Certainly. Thank you for having me here today, Kim. It's a treat to be with you and Luke and talk about one of the issues that's near and dear to my heart. Just a quick caveat before I go to that question that, as you know, the foundation, we're prohibited from lobbying. So my comments are going to focus more specifically and generally about CSAs and not focus specifically on any legislation that's currently being considered in Michigan or any other places, because we have some opportunities percolating around the country. So I'm just going to speak more generally about CSA. So how did children's savings accounts get started? Pretty simple answer to that, concrete answer, but then the sub question is, how did the field evolve? Dr. Michael Sheridan, Washington University, wrote a book back in 1992, I believe, called Assets and the Poor. And the premise of the book was that for families to get ahead, we really needed to not just think about income. Income is important, but if all we're doing is making sure people have enough to meet their expenses every month and not anything that extends beyond that, that they can use to make mobility enhancing investments or cushion from economic speed bumps that may happen, then we're leaving families just at a certain economic level, and that there was more that we could do to help them get ahead. That's kind of the logic around the asset building movement writ large. More specifically, children's savings accounts came out of the individual development account movement, saving for a home, education, starting a small business. And what we saw in that work were that a lot of families, once they began the financial education and saving, they wanted to pass that strategy on to their kids. And then the third piece is simply that we learned around 2012 that having some kind of college savings account really has positive impacts on young people's aspirations. And I can come back to that later, but the simple research factoid is that kids with children's savings accounts are more likely to aspire to college, more likely to go to college. And by college, I mean post-secondary broadly, 2-year, 4-year occupational training program. and then kids who don't have those accounts. And that educational impact is the work that the foundation has been trying to spread to more children in the country in our work over the past decade and a half.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for explaining that caveat, because I actually meant to mention earlier that, we really wanted you to talk about the kind of about CSAs in general and not about the legislation. We know that you're not able to do that, but we are really grateful because you bring such history to how these programs have developed. And, turning to Luke, I know that on the state level, you have been really, CDM has been very instrumental in supporting CSAs. And, I started off by talking about how it's difficult to kind of capture, easily capture what a CSA does because they're different. There's so many different models. Can you just talk about the diversity of the kinds of CSA programs that you've seen?
Definitely. Thanks for having us today, Kim. And I just wanted to say it's an honor to be here with Benita and Kim. This has been a really exciting time for the Children's Savings Account field. CDM, as you mentioned, has been supporting local stakeholders and organizations and communities across the state in this work for a number of years, but I think it's really taken on a new lens with the attention that under your leadership, Kim, that it's been given by the Poverty Task Force and also by the governor's office through her budget announcement and recommendations. It's a very exciting time, but of course we have to, go back and thank Benita and the CS Mott Foundation. They've really been the foundation and the backbone of this growth in Michigan and, as you mentioned, around the country. So to your question about the diversity of the programs, I think this is a fascinating field because it is so diverse and it doesn't really fall into any neat stereotypes, geographic, political, in terms of where it's sprouted up around the state and around the country. A program like this may often be stereotyped in some people's minds as kind of a big city or a blue state kind of program, but I think that's, the way it's grown in Michigan at least has really defied that. We have programs, in the city of Lansing, one starting in Detroit as we speak, some of the larger sort of mid-sized cities like Jackson and Muskegon, but then we also have programs all over the UP and some rural areas of the state, Southwest Michigan and Berry County. We have a few programs in the UP, Menominee, Marquette, to name a couple. So that's one of the things I just want to emphasize, that it's really, the model has really been seen as valid by stakeholders of all sort of stripes around the state. And I would say what's crucial is everybody's come up with their own kind of specific local recipe to make this work, but the sort of unifying features are that first you need these goals in mind that Benita already talked to around the asset building and the career achievement and the sort of planning for the future. You need to all be on the same page about those, but then you also really need a mixture of sort of stakeholder institutions and funders. So we've seen that kind of come in all different shapes and sizes, I think, in Michigan, but you need a few institutions, like a financial institution. In many places, it's a bank or a credit union. You need involvement of the school district. In many places, you have the involvement of the local government. We think that's very important, or multiple local governments. And then the philanthropy, in many places, that's our community foundations, some combination with potentially other philanthropic causes in the given community. So who it's led by and kind of who runs the program differs, but those are some of the consistent pieces, I would say, is that you need to try to check those boxes in terms of the diverse groups that are supporting it, those stakeholders I mentioned, and then really having those higher purpose goals like Benita talked to.
Can I add on to that, Kim?
Oh, sure. Absolutely, Benita. Thank you.
I would just add on, one of the things that's really important is that children's savings accounts aren't standalone programs. They're best embedded and layered onto other initiatives without being too nerdy, weird. They're a force multiplier. On their own, I think they have impacts, but where we really see the benefit of children's savings accounts are when they're embedded with other education initiatives or other workforce development initiatives, the cross-pollination and the cross-support.
There is such diversity. Can you describe what a successful CSA program?
Luke, I don't know about you, but it sounded like she was going to ask us what a successful CSA program might look like. Is that?
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that part. I just couldn't tell who it was targeted toward. Go. So you go first, and I'll follow up.
Well, I think Luke, you covered that in terms of the. Hi, Kim. You're back. It sounded like you asked what a successful CSA program looks like.
Yes. Yeah. If you can just kind of talk about how do you know that a program is effective? What are the kind of markers that you look at to determine success?
Okay. Let me answer that a couple of ways. First, in the program design realm, and then what you're actually seeing in terms of participation by people in the program. So in program design, there's a couple of things, and this is the wish list, but one, you want universal access to children's savings accounts. You can target within a CSA program, but where you really get the benefits are when you have community level engagement and participation in programs. So to say it really simply, you want everybody, all kids in the program. And then you can always layer on top of that. Ideally, you want automatic enrollment. We as people maybe aren't always as motivated as we should be to do all these things, and automatic enrollment and automatic defaults help us. And so what's an automatic default? It's you automatically enroll people in the program and make them opt out. The language we talk about is opt out and opt in. Opt in is where you have to actually fill out the paperwork to do something. And we know inertia can sort of slow engagement and participation down. Opt out is we're going to put you in the program and then you fill out a bunch of paperwork to get out of the program, and you see participation rates much higher when you use opt-out strategies. And so I'd say that. Seed deposits, very important, because that starts off and kicks off and says to participants, we're investing in you. And similarly to the seed deposit would be ongoing incentives to engage families and young people in the program, whether that's matching incentives or other incentives that enable families to continue participating. We can talk later if there's time about who can best play some of those roles, but those are some of the elements of program design that we think is very important. Now, in terms of what does it look like when a program is successful? Quite simply, engagement of families in the accounts. What we see from the Indiana program, there are families that are more engaged both by showing the savings in the account. They do things like talk more to their students, to their children about the importance of education. They're doing things like planning for the future. And so outreach that really engages families, giving families the supports that they need, really thinking about the program from a market segmentation. Some families you can give information about the program, point them in that direction, and they will go. Very low touch. On the other end of the spectrum, you'll have a lot of families, this is brand new for them, saving and planning and financial education. They're going to need a lot more support to get on that pathway and stay on it, and a high touch strategies. And so making sure that your program can support all families where they are with those different strategies is important.
That's great. And Luke, can you talk about the outcomes that you've seen in highly effective CSA programs? What kind of outcomes are you seeing with families?
Yeah, and that's
Particularly with
obviously
low-income families.
Yeah, and that's obviously the end goal here is we want to look at outcomes, and we've gotten into a good place of being more systematic about measuring the impacts of these programs. One thing to keep in mind is these are long-term investments, right? This is a reason we need that diverse set of stakeholders that I talked about, including, philanthropy, government, and financial institutions, because you need to have some, what we call in the real estate development business, patient capital invested here. This is not a program that turns around results in a few months or even a couple years in many cases. So I think the link to your question about the outcomes, I think Benita teased a couple of these, but I'll just cite some of our favorite stats about the great outcomes. That low income enrolled families average 6 times more savings than their peers who are not in a CSA. So if you're in a CSA and low income, you have 6 times more educational savings than those who are not enrolled in a program. Saving just $500, and this is what I really want to emphasize has been tough for me to get my head around at first, is that, many times these dollar figures, when you look at the cost of college, are very small, right? And it's more about building this identity and layering the programs and the motivation and the engagement that Benita talked about. So that saving $500 can make a child 5 times more likely to graduate from college than a peer without any savings. And often they have significantly thousands of dollars less in student debt as well when they get there. So even that $500 can have a massive multiplier effect, building around the engagement, the awareness of the tools that are out there for you and your family. I saw this myself as a student in a low-income school. We had very few folks that attended even the large state institutions, but I had a few, folks who really invested in me and tried to build that identity. And it's about how you think of yourself and what the standards you're setting for yourself are, whether that's, an occupational school, a 2-year degree that you're going straight into a career for, a 4-year liberal arts degree, whatever, whatever that definition of success is. So that's the identity-based kind of motivation that can be really powerful. That's much more than a few $100s.
And I just want to take out my magic highlighter here and highlight something that Luke just said that's so important, is that one of the criticisms of children's savings account programs is that low and moderate income families cannot save. They do not have the resources to save. And there have been decades of research in these programs, starting from the seed demonstration, or even what we learned from the American Dream demonstration of individual development accounts, that is patently untrue. Low and moderate income families do save, and they save in greater proportions than their more wealthier peers. Now, that said, the amounts that they can save are smaller, and that's why it's important that we think about really engaging philanthropy and governments in getting more money into those accounts, large dollar investments into those accounts, so that we can see even greater impacts, both on the developing of the future orientation and the mindset, as well as the later impacts like less debt and being able to plan effectively for post-secondary education.
So just kind of going back, I guess I'll also highlight something that Luke said, because it's a really remarkable statistic that even having $500 saved, a family with $500 saved, low income family, is 5 times more likely to have a child who actually earns a degree. Tell us why. I mean, that just seems like, $500 clearly is not going to pay college tuition at any school. So what is it about just having that, that account that kind of builds that college going culture that you both just spoke of?
Go ahead, Luke.
I mean, it's a complicated mechanism to be sure, right? And I think it goes back to what Benita said about the layering, though. It's where the programs are encouraging engagement, and you know, a program like Bold Lansing in our state capital, you've got the MSU credit union, you've got the school district, you've got the city, you've got other stakeholders that I'm probably forgetting, all sort of telling you this is a great idea. You need to plan for the future, right? And you've got motivational events happening in the school district. You've got other opportunities for your family to get engaged, you know, events outside of school hours. So I think that's part of it, is just that aiming high. But I also think it's an opportunity for communities to kind of get engaged with other financial education programs. You know, we support a number of programs around the state that, you know, help people with their tax preparation, other financial asset building. And I think these are the ways to layer in those other programs, you know, and just get people expecting more, you know, of themselves and of the institutions that serve them. You know, I think a lot of it is knowledge and access of programs. Like I mentioned earlier, for me, you know, my sort of touchstone turning point was the MET program, Michigan Education Trust. We didn't have a CSA, but I think it served, you know, my grandparents and parents kind of all scraped it together to make that happen. And it was just this expectation that I was going to use that thing, you know, because we invested in it. And I think it also catalyzed for me opportunities of other scholarships, even at a small dollar. You know, I still remember, you know, earning a Kiwanis scholarship that was $750, I think. And then you look at the bill from the University of Michigan, even in 1995, and it's sort of laughable that $750 is going to change that around. But it set me up to access a number of other, you know, federal, state opportunities for financial support in my education that maybe I wouldn't have had if I just didn't have that expectation and that support from the folks at home, you know, at the Rotary Club, to make sure, you know, we're not wasting our $750 on you. So I think that's part of it, is frankly is expectations. But Benita is much more steeped in the research on this, so maybe you have a less personalized answer to that question.
Well, but I think that personal example can be extrapolated to what we've learned. So I really love that you asked this question, Kim. Thank you so much, because it does get to the core of children's savings accounts and why the Mott Foundation has been so engaged in supporting this. And it's also a moment to give a shout out to Dr. Willie Elliott. Even though he's at that other school down the road, the Wolverines, he is the leading researcher in the country on this question and identity-based motivation. So I'd say before all that research, you know, you have an account, you have this impact, kids with accounts, $500 more likely to go to college. It was a little bit of a black box of why is that happening? What's going on? And so there are a couple of things that are going on, but really simple to understand. One are parental expectations. And if you look at educational literature, parental expectations are huge in shaping the outcomes for young people in the education space. And what Treasurer Jose Cisneros in San Francisco would say is, when parents start saving in the accounts and it activates the saver's mindset in parents, they start seeing those resources build up for their child, and they begin developing higher expectations for their children. And higher expectations play out in the way that they engage with their children. They talk to them more about school. They get actively involved in helping their children think about planning for post-secondary education. So that's one piece of it, is parental expectations. And then there's identity-based motivation. Kids know they have this account, and it's tremendously important that kids know they have the account. In fact, best practice in the field is that the account is set up in the child's name. And when they know they have this account and they know that resources are being put into this account and that people from the community are invested in them, they develop what we call the college-going identity. And it's really sort of, once they develop that identity, I think, therefore I am and I become. So you have expectations and aspirations, and that's what these accounts do a good job of building and cultivating in parents and young people.
That's great. Well, I just have one final question. This is just for Luke. Can you talk a little bit, Luke, about, as you've worked with the CSAs that we already have in the state, obviously, there's a need for kind of technical assistance, and you've given them advice and given them kind of access to best practices and that kind of thing. Can you talk about why having a state infrastructure, a statewide infrastructure to try to kind of incubate and seed these accounts would be a great development for this field?
Of course, that's one of my favorite questions right now, Kim. So thanks to the support of Benita and the CS Mott Foundation, we have been helping provide, what I'd call backbone support, technical assistance to those 15 and growing number of programs around the state that we mentioned earlier. So that's wonderful, and I think it's done in a very Michigan way. We love our local control, right? We love to create our own models for things. I know this, having worked with local governments for over a decade. We'd love to have our own versions of things, and I think that's wonderful. And we have a coalition, a Michigan CSA coalition, that's really networked those folks around the state and compare and contrast. But I think we've gotten to the place where all those members of that network have really agreed that if we want to take this to the next level and really emerge Michigan as a leader in this field, which we all believe it can be, we have the preeminent foundation that's investing in these around the country, based here in our state. We have a lot of wonderful examples of programs I've mentioned already, based here in our state. We've got a great track record as Michigan of investing in early childhood education and that savings mentality, going back to that MET program that I mentioned earlier, as well as the Michigan Saves program, the 529. So I think we've got a lot of the pieces, but we do really need a statewide coordinating entity, we think, to put all the pieces together and just help maintain everything in that kind of orbit. So we really think that would be a partnership. That we're not saying that we want a state agency to just sort of take it over and run everything from Lansing, but we do think that we've seen successful programs in other states, and this is another benefit we've gotten from the support of Mott Foundation. We have gotten to learn from some of the other states. Benita mentioned Indiana, but there's a number of other states that we've been learning from. So some of the things we see that are crucial roles for a statewide entity, whether that's a nonprofit or a state agency, is fundraising. So there's opportunities for collaborative fundraising. So right now, everybody's kind of going it alone in many ways in their region or their county. So that can be state funding, which we advocate for, but then also collective fundraising from other sources. There's kind of community engagement support that could happen from a statewide coordinating entity to really raise awareness of these kinds of programs statewide. Have a lot of conversations like we're having today, for example, but among community leaders, policymakers, et cetera, all around the state. Technical assistance to both current and emerging programs, which involves really having those standards that Benita talked about what kind of outcomes are we shooting for? What are the models that you need to follow to make sure you're getting the outcomes you desire? The kind of what we call account platform management. So that would allow programs to really have low cost access to things like IT support, training, management of data from say a web portal, et cetera. And then, continuing that Michigan CSA network sort of coalition management, meaning that's tracking achievements, bragging about those achievements, through annual reports and other things. So these are all, so just to repeat, it's fundraising, community engagement, technical assistance, and account management in communications. These are all things that can be done in sort of the quilt version that we're doing now, I think, of the individual pieces all kind of coming together. But it gets to a point where it's more difficult to continue that at sort of a grassroots level, and really raising it up a notch and having that state backbone to help all of these programs grow and prosper, and then bring new programs online to fill the gaps we have in the state. We think is a really wise investment by the state of Michigan and by other funders that are interested.
All right, thank you so much. So we were going to open for questions. I'm not really seeing any questions in the chat right now, so I'm going to just ask both Benita and Luke if they just have some final thoughts they'd like to share as we close. Oh, actually, here's a question. I just saw a question pop up. Are these savings accounts countable assets for SSI and SNAP benefits? I think that's a really good question.
So the answer to that is, in some places they are, in some places they aren't. This is part of the policy agenda that the Children's Savings Account field has worked on nationally. Personally, they should not be a countable asset. Again, I started off talking about the sort of the philosophy behind asset building movement writ large and children's savings accounts. So they should not be. And in some places, they are not countable, but that usually has been the result of some type of policymaker education work to show that it's important, and it would have a counterproductive effect if, in fact, they were counted against benefits, because then parents are not going to engage. And you need the parent engagement to produce the outcomes that we've talked about. So again, I'll just summarize quickly. Some places, unfortunately, they still are, some places not, but this is, excuse me, an important policy agenda or complementary piece to the work that the Children's Savings Account field is doing.
And Benita, if I could just weigh in a little bit, because one of the things that we're really working on with the Poverty Task Force is addressing the benefits cliff.
Yeah.
Certainly this would be, if this were something that kind of was a disincentive to getting benefits, that is an element. But I can report that there seems to be a lot of interest on both sides of the aisle for addressing the benefits cliff. And
yes,
there seems to be, really support for building efforts to build assets particularly among low-income families. So I can tell you that's top of mind as we kind of develop and think about these ideas. Is let's not, first do no harm. So we don't want to create something and expand something that's really going to hurt people who are receiving benefits now. So
exactly. And there's an additional comment that came up that says, totally agree with what's being said, but as you know, poor households are not permitted to save money. So the complementary strategy, in addition to excluding CSAs, is raising asset limits in benefit programs, because it's not just a children's savings account. It's a car, it's a home, it's a savings account. It's all of these things that make for economic security, financial stability, as well as mobility that are being restricted from families. So this is an important complementary policy agenda for children's savings accounts. And children's savings accounts are an important complementary agenda to what I traditionally or think of as traditional anti-poverty policy. The other comment I would make on that is that's where it becomes more important that the accounts are in the children's name. If they are in the family, the parent's name, the adult's name, then they do look different and are treated differently. When they're in the child's name, it has, at least nationally, been a little bit easier to make the case for exclusion. And I would just add one more, that the accounts are restricted, and that helps as well. The money that goes into an account from a philanthropy, a government, etc., those dollars are restricted. Parents, savings that they make, they can withdraw their savings depending on the rules of the program. Different programs have different rules around the country, but the accounts being restricted for educational purposes or specific other purposes is also helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that also speaks to a question I see in the chat now.
I see it just popped up and I was speaking to it. That's what those restrictions are for. And, you know, I just want to comment on this because with some data that came out of San Francisco is the oldest, not that the field is particularly mature overall, but it is the oldest municipal children's savings account program in the country. And 2020, last year, as we all know, was a very difficult year for a lot of different reasons, but not the least of which was economically and financially for a lot of families. With more than 40,000 children's savings accounts, San Francisco had just fewer than 24 families would take money from those accounts. And I heard specific individual anecdotes of when families called the treasurer's office to say they needed to take money out of the account. One story just really stuck with me of the mother who was absolutely gutted that she had to do that, but really was facing difficult choices and pledged that, you know, she would return the money because it was to her sacred for her child's education. But the bigger point here is that 40,000 some accounts, I can't do that kind of math in my head, but that's really less than 1% of 1% of 1% that 24 people took money out of those accounts. Will it happen? Of course. Does it happen in great numbers? Absolutely not, because low-income parents, moderate-income parents are absolutely no different than wealthier parents. They want for their children things that they will deny themselves. That's true across the board. And so I would say it's not a big threat or concern, let's say it that way.
Yeah, generally in Michigan, you know, those, especially the contributions from the seed contributions from the local institutions and the incentives that are given, say by the school district or financial institution, are not subject to benefits calculations. But this is why I just want to emphasize, go back to what you asked earlier, Kim, about the benefits of kind of statewide support. I think these are often complex program design decisions that I know we have some institutions struggling with right now in, for example, the city of Detroit, juggling these things. So I think having, you know, some authoritative voices that you can go to help us, what are the pros and cons of different design decisions that we make, you know, who has tried this and what are the ramifications been in another city or state, is very important to have, because you want to connect those seemingly, you know, minute, complex program design decisions on the front end. You want to connect it to your goals in the long run, you know, that you have.
Exactly. And that's where some of the work we've been doing at the Mott Foundation is helping move the field forward, because to Luke's point, the idea and concept of children's savings account programs is very simple and straightforward. Implementing programs, whole different ball of wax entirely. And the importance of having the work that CEDM and others like CEDM are doing around the country to create peer learning communities. There are dozens of programs around the country who are a little bit further down the path of implementing and designing children's savings account programs and making sure that those organizations can connect with what's happening in Michigan so that we can learn from best practice and not have to repeat some of the mistakes that have happened, and not reinvent wheels is very important. That's some of the work that we're doing at the foundation with the Midwest Children's Savings Account Consortium. We're supporting a similar consortium in the New England region, and there's a new consortium coming online in California that'll cover what's happening in the Pacific Northwest and the Southwest. And all of these consortium are important. So because the growth of CSAs really has outpaced the TA capacity in the field. So building that peer-to-peer TA is very important, along with the policy work and the ongoing research and around program design and implementation. And that's kind of the set of projects we're supporting at the Mott Foundation. You're on mute.
Sorry, I muted myself because there was a very loud noise outside of my window. So I do want to say that I am so glad that neither Luke nor Benita disappointed this morning. We knew that they would bring excellent information to the table. And I thank you so much for sharing your vast experience with this really important strategy. It's something that we think could have a great benefit to our state and to, particularly for low-income families. And so I thank you, although the person who is mowing the grass outside of my door, I hope you can hear me because it's quite loud. But I do thank you for your sharing your thoughts with us this morning. I'm going to put in the chat my personal email address for those who are on the call who are interested in hearing more about the legislation that is pending. If you want to hear more about what we are calling for the state government to invest in as it relates to children's savings account, we would love to give you accounts. We would love to give you more information. And I just want to thank everyone who's on for joining us for these conversations. Please feel free to share with us your thoughts on future webinars that we can have with the Poverty Task Force. There is a survey that you will find in the chat. I hope that you will avail yourself of it and share your thoughts on this conversation and your thoughts about future ones. And next month, we're going to be talking to Peter Rourke from the Michigan League for Public Policy about some research that he's done on unemployment here in the state of Michigan. And we know unemployment, particularly coming from LEO, which is the department where our organization is housed. Unemployment has been top of mind for pretty much everyone in the last 16 months or so. So it's an important topic, but he's kind of taking the long view about some of the things that we do here in Michigan, some of our policy decisions around it. So we'll hear from Peter next month. We're so grateful for Luke and Benita this month, and we hope that we will see you. And if you're interested in getting more information about the budget appropriation that we're asking for children's savings accounts, please feel free to email me. And I see that Benita has also shared some links that speak to saving, because obviously we recognize that saving is such an important.
That link is to the study that I mentioned from San Francisco and their experience with the kindergarten to college program during 2020.
And I know that was, I believe that now Governor Gavin Newsom was he? That's how he was, because I know that California right now is actually debating investing, I believe it's $50 million in children's savings accounts in the state of California. They have a huge budget surplus. People know.
The state budget for California, which I think has been approved now, Governor Newsom put just shy of $1.8 billion into, with a B, into the children's savings account program. That's one
time. I underestimated just a little bit.
One-time federal stimulus dollars, ARP dollars. California's in surplus right now. And then it also included an ongoing investment of about $107 million annually from the general fund. So this is a huge win for the children's savings account field and tremendous momentum for conversations to advance children's savings accounts in other places, including at the national level. So Kim, thank you so much for mentioning what just happened in California, because it is very exciting.
Obviously, that has the potential to be very transformational, but as Luke mentioned before, and you mentioned, support for children's savings accounts are not just for blue states like California. You know, we know California has the 8th largest economy in the world. So we know that they're dealing with the, you know, different level of ability to invest. But I know that you've also worked with Indiana, with Maine, and other states that are.
Nebraska has one of the most exciting children's savings account programs in the country. And it's a very red state, not different than Michigan. It's got a couple of big cities, but lots of rural areas and rural poverty, and they're doing a great job on children's savings accounts as well.
I think that's a really important message to share. So again, thank you all so much for joining, to Luke and Benita, to everyone who has joined us for this webinar, and we'll see you again next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Kim and Benita, for your
Bye-bye.
leadership.
Thank you.